Henry IV, Part 1, Part 2, and Henry V. So in many ways, I kind of like to think of it as like the Empire Strikes Back of Henry IV, Part 1, where there's more things, more plot, more characters, more pathos, and a couple little cliffhangers that leave you to the end, which launches you into Henry V, which is this extreme examination of a warrior king and how he takes on the mantle of becoming a unifier of his nation, essentially. And this play, I also think, is very interesting because it's sort of the culmination of Bolingbroke's journey in the play. Bolingbroke, Henry IV, Henry Bolingbroke is his surname, and how he's still holding on to all of the prophecy that was out there when he was usurping the crown from Richard II. And he keeps reflecting on this throughout the entire play about how foul sin through corruption will basically overtake everything that he's done. And I think what Shakespeare's trying to do is really bring that to a literal manifestation in the play by seeing him taking this prophecy internally and it manifesting himself in illness and sickness and unease and turmoil and rebellious factions coming at him left and right. And then you begin to see that in Falstaff, how Falstaff has gout at the beginning of the play. He's falling away. He's hanging out with Doll Tearsheet, who is a whore. And he's embracing that side of love and these people that are in the underbelly of society trying to pave their way. As John Falstaff says in the play, I shall turn diseases to commodity. For survival, I will take that notion of life and try to make an existence. And the journey in this play is how a young man will then say to himself, I can either choose that path as the future heir to the throne, or I can choose this other, which is that of the Lord Chief Justice and his father, and about right versus wrong. And it's complex. It's a lot more complex, I think, than it's not as black and white as Part 1. It's a little bit more gray and psychological and a little bit more melancholy. I like to think of it as very Chekhovian in the play, especially when we get into the Shallow scenes and we see these two characters of Justice Shallow, a new character to this world all of a sudden, who is an old friend of Sir John Falstaff. They went to school together, reflecting on their childhood and on their days gone by, and that they're past their prime, and that death is right in front of them, that they are going to die. Falstaff says that many times in the play, I am old, I am old. And the sense of what Hal gave Falstaff, which was life, hope. Hal has to turn away from Falstaff. And of course, we see that at the end of the play with his dismissal, which is this public dismissal in front of the entire kingdom, essentially, that he says, I choose not to go that route. And eventually that becomes the demise of Sir John Falstaff. And it also becomes the demise of Hal turning himself away from a wrong path of existence, which is that of sin, corruption, robbery, and misrule. And so I'm not exactly sure why we haven't done it. That said, because it's a significant portion of a journey of that character. And I'm really excited to see it, or to work on it, excuse me, for that very thing. Having played Prince Hal and Henry V and Hotspur, I'm so jealous watching it because I wish I had had the opportunity, especially to do those scenes in the bedroom scenes with he and his father, because they are beautifully written passages in this play. And to see that final thread woven between the two of them, I think is instrumental in the next chapter that you see with Henry, who takes to heart what his father says, which is busy, giddy minds with foreign quarrels. He takes that to heart in Henry V, in his conquering France in Henry V, and his quest for legitimizing himself on the throne. It's very complex and very rich, and also challenging and rough. And I think that's something that we should see.
And also, as you were talking about this, I was thinking Falstaff has the most lines in the play. something like 600,
Yeah.
and then Henry the next, and Hal not so many. So you were mentioning to me earlier how you rearranged a little bit to have a presence of the king early on. Do you want to talk about that decision?
I did, yeah. You know, as I kept reading it, and I looked at many other adaptations or compilations of other productions, what they have done. And in Shakespeare's play, King Henry actually doesn't appear until scene 10. In our play, when he's walking in alone there at the end of the act, that is the first time you see him in Henry IV, Part 1 or 2. And I wanted to move him up closer because I thought his presence was necessary. And I thought the conflicted turmoil needed to be woven in earlier. Same with Prince Hal. Prince Hal, actually, where he appears is right in the play, but he doesn't appear. He only has 2 scenes in Act 1. And Henry is only really has 1, but I've kind of made it as 2 because I wanted that solo moment of him reflecting and sort of lost king ruminating on the state of being as well as the state of the kingdom. But it's Sir John Falstaff's play, and I think that's intentional on Shakespeare's part. A, because it's probably one of the most fascinating characters ever drawn, but also it was crucial to sort of begin to see this guy on his own and trying to find a footing in the world. And in Part 1, you sort of see him straddling both worlds with more ease, and especially with his relationship with Hal and the robbery at Gad's Hill, and then, of course, in the tavern scenes, and then on the Battle of Shrewsbury, Hal and Falstaff are present. In this play, they are separated, and you only see them once in the play. And it's almost a replaying of what we saw in Part 1, where you see the beginnings of this sort of life and jovial sense of atmosphere, but something is not the same. It's not the same. People have been altered. And I think that's intentional on Shakespeare's part to do that, to show this man who believes that give me life, as he says in Part 1, is now going, I hope I survive, you know, and how the only way to survive is by embracing foulness and disease. And yeah, so that's just interesting that he did that. And also to make him more present, to know that when he is not present, it's going to have more impact, I think, is also another intention on Shakespeare's part.
Okay, we should, I shouldn't dominate this hour. There's a lot of people here who have comments. And could you, since there are so many people, can you sort of help me after you have your comment or question, look around to see who else, raise your hand. Sometimes I get people that come up to me at the break and say, you never called on me. And I had something very important to say. And I say, well, you have to help me with that. So
yeah, just another little thing, speaking on the, you know, sort of changes in the text and everything. Another thing I want to point out is that I actually combined 2 of the roles of some of Henry's men, his seconds in the play. The Lord Chief Justice, Jamie Newcomb, I've combined with another role in the play, Warwick, in the play, because I really wanted to instill the sense of the Lord Chief Justice as a counsel with Henry, as well as the idea that here is the guy who is out in the street, basically the policeman, the head policeman for the king, who is also in his chamber saying, I have a feeling that your son is going to change, that there is a officer of the law who sees black and white, and yet at the same time sees the potential of somebody who's committing a crime. I really wanted to try to weave that into our production. So that's just another thing about the editing of our version.
Well, first of all, I wanted to make sure it's turned on. Oh. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
First of all, I wanted to say we're so glad that you're doing the history plays in sequence. We really like that, with the same people, some of the same costuming. Great. I think that's a really good decision.
Great,
like that. I think the scene where Falstaff is publicly humiliated is really hard because you love Falstaff, and that's hard to see. I was reading Asimov this morning. He says he thinks a big reason is because it's the coronation, it's this public procession, everybody is watching, and having Falstaff step forward publicly and confront Hal at that point forces him to do what he does. I wondered what your take was on that scene. Also wanted to say that you said these characters he's been associating with are the underbelly.
Mhm.
Some of them are a lot more likable than some of the court people. You know, they
Yeah.
seem more real.
Yeah. Well, and that's exactly Hal's struggle of seeing humanity in the lower class.
Yeah.
And then you see the court and some of the rebellious faction and some of Henry's actions. I mean, let's face it, some of Henry's actions have not been the most noble. It's been a petrified sense of fear-based leadership. And that's exactly Hal's struggle, is adopting some of the beauty of the tavern and those people into his sense of being. To turn that away is probably the most moving, I think, one of the most moving scenes in Shakespeare, because you know it's coming. You know he has to at some point make the change, and it has to be done in a public way. And to know that it's in the processional to his coronation makes it all that more jarring. And he also kind of throws him a feather there at the end by saying, if you change your ways, I will reconsider this, and we will move forward. And all of in Henry IV Part 1, that's a lot of their sparring is about right and wrong, and about doing the right thing, and how all along is like, no, if you do this, you will pay the consequences. And it culminates to that moment. And just like Hal has a pivotal point of change, which is turning away from that, Falstaff has the opportunity also, but he doesn't do it. And it, of course, as they say in Henry V, the king has killed his heart. It's not that he dies of old age, it's that he dies of a broken heart, because his hope has been shattered. And that is I think, more powerful and touching than somebody just passing away. It's that they die of a broken heart, essentially. That's the thing that Henry's going to take with him later, as we begin to see in Henry V also, about there is right and there is wrong. And if you choose wrong, you will pay the consequences in this world. And that is debatable, but that's something about trying to realign and restructure rule. And those that adopt to it, we see what happens in Henry V. But I also think it's some of the things that can be misconstrued, and we'll get to that play later. We probably shouldn't spend all our time on that play. Leave you something to be wanting for. But he could be viewed as a warmonger, essentially, or somebody who is out for his own good. I don't really think that's the case personally. I think it's about trying to unify things. I don't think it's for his own personal gain, but it can be misinterpreted for that very thing. It's complex, as life is.
First off, love the beard. Looks great. Second,
oh, thank you. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah,
right. It's great in this 98-degree weather. I'm really loving it.
As a director and actor, which is more gratifying for you, to be a part of the external battles or the internal battles?
Wow. The one thing they're both equally satisfying, I have to say, in different ways. The one thing about being a director, which I think is really interesting, is you can kind of put it all up there, but then you have to really sit back and just pray. Pray the way you're doing is going to work. When you're in it, sometimes you have a little bit of control as to putting it together, but it's making the internal exciting. I think that is the challenging also, and coming across to an audience, making the internal external, essentially. That's very challenging, but they're equally rewarding, I should say.
Yes, I was appalled by the treachery that took place with the armies and the prince telling him their grievances would be addressed.
Yeah.
And instead killing everyone and
Yeah.
attacking the army as it's broken up. Could you address that?
Yeah, it's, you know, we kept coming back to that in putting the play on its feet, because you see an act of Henry there, and that is the rebels. I think their main drawing point is that if they don't do something, they are going to pay the consequences, no matter what. And that's Northumberland's fear in the play. And that Mowbray tries to instill in him is that if you don't take action, he's going to cut your head off no matter what. And that's a foul step, or a misinterpreted moment for the Archbishop of York, of trying to address peace. And I think that's also a man of the cloth who's optimistic. And as they say, these grievances will be redressed. And he says, peace will bring this thing. And they also think, oh, the king is weary, he's at ill. And then you see his son, not his second son, also his third son, which is sometimes misinterpreted also. People think John is the next in line with the throne. He is not. That he takes a very villainous thing and stabs them in the back, essentially. Says, I offer you peace, that peace we share, and then he arrests them of high treason and has their heads cut off. It's not the most noble thing to do. And that's, again, another thing that Hal will begin to try to compartmentalize as a leader. And you will see a facet of that in him also. That's another thing I think that Shakespeare's really great about, is like weaving this element of the sins of the father into the sons. And you see that with John. That is a cold, calculated maneuver, strategic maneuver to do that. And the Archbishop, Mowbray, all those guys are privy to that. And I think that's the thing that Northumberland fears about going forth. That's why I think he retreats away. He's also swayed to great effect by Lady Percy in saying, if they have half the numbers, if we had half that, we're going to survive. Let them go in first. There's no need to dive in full-hearted. And I think at the heart of that is fear of Henry. And that's the whole thing we see through his entire reign, is him taking the throne, this lineal divine right of kings that has been previous to this reign, about you are ordained from God to be the next king, has been pulled and completely altered. And him saying, I am king of England, I have right to the throne. You know, there's a little loophole in this whole thing. And then from that moment on, it's been about, I got to get everybody away, trying to gain control, trying to keep people at bay. And it kills Henry. It kills him mentally, emotionally, physically. And it is, again, an example of absolutely that. Somebody who is absolutely afraid to embrace justice in a peaceful manner, to try to talk things through, because this is also a shift from a medieval society into a more diplomatic way of thinking, and which we begin to see with Henry, who starts adopting, you know, the people here, really. I'm glad that you recognize it, because it's something that is one of those things that's like, that's not really the most noble way to go about keeping your reign together. And it's sort of a bruise that on his sense of leadership, I think. And that's the thing that builds the external trust. And it's also the thing that Henry says to Hal, on his, you know, on his deathbed, all my friends, you must make your friends. The sense of trying to gain allies. And I think Henry is afraid of allies, because they have all betrayed him. And Northumberland is one of them, who was an ally to him and then went against him. You can see where that fear is rooted, and that becomes Henry's quest, is to try to adopt, not necessarily with fear, but with confidence. And that's the next chapter. So I'm glad you see that, because yes, it's one of those things that should make you uneasy. Yeah.
On the back row here. Do you have the mic? Is the mic traveling? Oh, okay, go ahead.
You alluded to the 98-degree temperature. As a director, how do you, and maybe we set back far enough, but how do you get your actors not to sweat where the audience is just...
There are ice packs. Yeah, that's good. I mean, John Aline, who's playing Falstaff, he has. He told me last night he had 6 ice packs. He's like, I can get up to 8, I think, but he had 6 of them in last night that are built into his costume to keep him cool. Now you have to think about that because he's wearing a fat suit, and he's also has ice packs in there that will melt and will create more weight as the play progresses. It's 95 degrees when the play starts. They're wearing leather. They're wearing wool. They're wearing fur. Yes, it can pull one down. And sometimes that just happens. And, that also affects, we're also in the place right now when we're in preview where we are rehearsing during the day. All of those actors you saw last night go into rehearsal this afternoon. Some of them are in rehearsal right now before the preview. So, it's a tiring time for everybody. And this last week is kind of like you just got to keep your momentum up. I like to think of it as it's a marathon, not a sprint. You have to pace yourself. And we did our first stage of the Tour de France, and then we'll have our next stage the next time around, But yeah, the heat plays to great effect with tempo, with just clarity, and the end of the week and everything like that. But
And just as
that's just the journey.
As a follow-up question, will any of that be mitigated in the new Cedar City Globe Theater?
No. Yeah, the joys of outdoor theater, Yeah.
Let me
As we get closer and closer to the sun.
here because it's kind of a low spot. I'm a fan, and we've attended many years and enjoy them very much. But the length of the productions are really wearing on me. And last night's was 3 hours.
It was actually, no, it was 2:36.
Really?
With a 15-minute intermission. So it wasn't all 3 hours. But yes, go ahead.
Anyway, I'm just thinking about your attendance in the future. And as it seems like they're getting longer. And I just think that you're going to be better off being shorter rather than longer.
Well, that's an interesting question. That's actually also the joys of running a theater company and a classical theater where these are 5-act plays. And this play is actually a lot longer than it is presented. It could have probably been much longer than it is because of all the cuts we made within it. I understand. I definitely understand, and have certainly been to shows that have been 90 minutes and has been in and out, and that's great. And I've also been to 4-hour shows that have been equally compelling. I think this is a product of our time, that people's attention span is dwindling. And when you are facing digital technology left and right, there's a quick attention span to go on to the next thing. And that's our struggle. That's our task as a theater art, a performing art, to try to capture an audience's attention based on language. These are plays about language, and they are 5-act plays, and some of them are not the 2-hour traffic of our stage. And it's also the thing that you try to instill to actors. So like you can think and speak faster. And, that's one of the things I know right now. I'm dealing with just pure sort of confidence, I guess. That's one of my notes for everybody. Speak faster, think quicker, keep it moving. And that's hard to do. But they are long plays. And sometimes it's a necessity because of the playwright's statement of purpose within those plays. I also think if we only had 90-minute plays all the time, people might be clamoring for more, so it's a balance, really. And I definitely understand where you're coming from. And at the same time, that's just sort of the nature of presenting classical material.
We're not ignoring this side if there are people that have comments.
In regards to language, the very last line of the play last night, and I believe I pondered it all night and I still have nothing. So I'm looking for some direction. Oh, for the Muse of Fire.
Mm-hmm.
Is that what it was?
Yep.
Help me out, because I've got nothing.
Oh, for a Muse of Fire is the first line in Henry V.
Thank you.
And the first line in Henry V is spoken by the chorus, who is an external member of the play, essentially, the person who is bringing the play together. In our particular production, what I was trying to do was bookend this with rumor and chorus. Henry IV Part 2 starts with an introduction with a character called Rumor. It's the only place the character appears in Shakespeare, who is spreading foul, tainted lies, basically, about events. And it becomes a manifestation of the idea of what a rumor is. Somebody saying something happened that is not the truth. And I was really interested in showing the beginning of that, which is somebody spreading false information, and at the end of the play, somebody spreading true information. And that becomes, again, the arc, I think, for Hal in accepting one form of life and moving forward. Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know how one of these things works, but
Close. Hold it close.
okay, closer.
Good.
I want to support you in what you've done with us. This came back this year because we saw Henry IV Part 1, and we enjoyed it very much. I'm kind of a history buff myself, and with history, it takes some time to tell. And I know that we have a culture that is very prone to instant gratification, but I appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to tell the tale. We, for instance, went to Gettysburg and bought the film Gettysburg. Well, that's a 4-hour plus film, but it takes that time to tell. And history is that way. It takes time to tell the story and present the people and how they interact and whatnot. And we have to be patient if we're going to understand history. And I appreciate very much what you've done.
Thank you. Appreciate that very much.
No, give it to that lady over there. She's waving.
Right over here. Game of Thrones, Yeah. Yeah, I agree. The comment was basically about Game of Thrones, how that's as close to sort of a Shakespearean type of drama that's out there, based on the characters and the nature of their actions, as well as the sort of internal struggles, and especially revolving around leadership and the rule of a kingdom. And I absolutely 100% concur and agree. In fact, the author of Game of Thrones, George Martin, I think has used Shakespeare as a huge influence, and especially the history plays of Shakespeare, because they are all that, these different families vying for power, and how they go about trying to A, obtain the power, and B, hold on to the power, which is automatically dramatic and compelling and theatrical. I also think, just interesting enough, I sort of mentioned that a little bit in my director's notes about the sort of serial drama. Shakespeare was sort of doing that before anybody, about here's one part of the story and here's the other part of the story. And Game of Thrones is very much like that, this sort of episodic serial drama that's being played out over, well, now years. Same with things like Wolf Hall, which is an examination of Henry VIII and all of that. We're seeing more of that in our culture, these people taking these sort of epic stories and playing them out over time. That's, again, I think another thing to address sort of the length issue. If I could get Henry IV in 3 installments, in hour installments each, I would do it. You know what I mean? Because it's just easier. But Shakespeare was doing that for an audience and writing 5-act plays in the process of doing that. And this play actually has an introduction and an epilogue, which we cut the epilogue in this play. So yeah, Shakespeare was weaving all of that first. It's a very accurate observation.
And I was thinking, per this man's comment about history, that it takes time, I was thinking about Shakespeare's audience in that day. This is about a king that lived in the 15th century, and Shakespeare's telling a tale that many of his audience would have been familiar with knowing who Henry V had been.
Yeah.
So he's taking a historical story, giving it a human dimension, and then giving us Henry Part 2 with a character, Falstaff, who may or may not have existed,
Yeah.
and making it the history story much more human. So if in your depiction, in your production, and this festival can present, quote, history plays that have a connection to us as human beings in the 21st century, then maybe they should be 5 hours long.
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing I find really fascinating too, is that here you have a 16th century playwright writing about 15th century events, and presenting them to a contemporary audience and adapting them. I remember saying that last year, where sometimes we take that history to be fact. Shakespeare's history sometimes as more factual than the actual history. And the truth of the matter is, he was a playwright who was trying to make things exciting here and kind of, change things. Oh, I add a character here, or I'll make Hotspur and Hal the same age. That wasn't a reality. Little things like that are definitely the playwrights, sort of changing history there. And it's fun. It's cool.
Yes, sir.
Well, I thought you did a really good job of answering my question before I asked it. But the other part of the question that I had is, did I hear right when there was some discussion about homosexuality between Falstaff and the other? And was that something that was written about? And was it even known that it existed? I mean, I don't know. It just...
Yeah, I mean, yes, I think so. I mean, I think that's what's going on in there. And I also think it's, him say, and Shallow says that I would have done anything too. But also I think it's also just about friendship, also. And it's not the only thing in Shakespeare where we see that and there are obviously historical documentation about, that. Who knows if that is accurate with Shakespeare, because a lot of it is sort of hearsay, and we don't know a lot of the truth about some of these things. But in this play, I do think that is the case, where they're saying we laid all night in the windmill and all that. And I think the references of it are, maybe. And I think that there's something also beautiful about that, because it shows two people that were vulnerable together at a point in their life, and whether it was whether it was a sexual act or anything, I'm not exactly sure. But the fact of the matter is, what they're saying is that there was a unified sense of being between these two people at a very vulnerable state, where there was kinship and camaraderie and connection. And that is important. And what we see with Falstaff, which I think I was just saying this the other day in my notes, is somebody who's trying to deny that in his life. And that's where he says, oh, Justice Shallow is full of lies. And again, that's another manifestation of justice also there. We see Justice Shallow and the Lord Chief Justice, one of them centering around Falstaff and the other one centering around Hal. And Justice Shallow sort of is that thing that Falstaff is kind of trying to push that out of his life, out of his memory. He's fleecing him. He's trying to get money out of him. And yet here's this other guy who says, can we just talk about the good old days and the time that we had? And it's a really poignant moment to me, because it shows some great vulnerability for Falstaff about the truth of who he really is and the thing that he's denying. And I think that's another thing that we see in his sense of falling away, is the rejection of that rather than the embracing of it. And I also think, they make fun of Feeble in the play, where he's the woman's tailor. And they have these things, oh, he would have pricked you and things like that are body sexual references. And the fact of the matter is, that character says the most powerful thing in the play: if it be my duty to go forward, every man owes God a death, he says, I will do it. Whereas all these other guys are afraid, they're paying their way out of this whole thing. And here you have the one character that they're mocking and making fun of say the most powerful thing in the play, which is, this is my duty, this is my right, and I will do it. And Bardolph recognizes that. And I think that's Shakespeare again going, here's life. It's all around you. You know, you can see the noble in the things that you do not think are the way that you believe in. And it's beautiful and poignant and specific, definitely.
Over here we have, this side is about to talk. So back row of the mic. And there are several seats here for those of you who are standing who want to, there are places over here to sit.
I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit to the casting process. I know it's incredibly difficult with just doing one season, but now you're trying to cast 2 or 3 years ahead to find someone who can play young Prince Hal in part 1 and an older King Henry in part 5. If that, the difficulty that adds to the process.
Yeah, I mean, we've never done this before where we've had actors carrying through with the same character over time, and that was part of our goal with and in presenting the history plays in succession, and hopefully trying to get key actors. And it's been fabulous to watch Larry and Sam on this journey. You know, we also have had 2 different Falstaffs. Henry Warnitz played Falstaff last year, and he was unable to join us this year because of some personal things going on in his life. And John Aline, who I worked with actually in Orlando, he played Falstaff for me in a production of Merry Wives. I knew he is Falstaff. I mean, he's a fabulous guy and great actor, and brought a whole new coloring to that character because he's new to the fold, you know. And we have a lot of new actors that weren't in our production last season. But the main goal was to try to get those central figures familiar, because I think it helps you on the journey of following it. It becomes, you have more investment in it. And so do I, and so do they, you know. And I mean, Larry, I was thinking about that the other night. He played Bolingbroke in Richard II, and now this is the 3rd play that he's been in with this character. And on our first read through in this play, I could see that the clothes were fitting him already. You know, it was like one of those things where he wasn't have to try it on. It was in him already who Henry is. And it also puts us ahead in the process, you know. So the casting of that, yes, is definitely crucial and challenging. And sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. You know, there were some and Brie Murphy, who played Quickly last year, is great to have her in here again as a sort of familiar, you know, landmine in this play of characters. It also comes down to just year to year, really. I mean, about the casting portion of things, because it's about building an ensemble for the plays that are being presented here, as well as the design concept, the director's input, who they might be looking at, who they might be considering. So there's a great deal of sacrifices that you make in building a company like this, but it's a very huge challenge. It's a very complex matrix. We're looking at 55 to 60 actors over the course of 6 plays. Some of them are in 3 plays. Some of them are in 3 plays and a green show. You know, they're working a lot, and you have to find those. We look for very versatile actors, those that can sing, those that can speak verse. It's a great challenge, though. It's fun, but it is hard. And so getting those to kind of carry through has also been instrumental in presenting them in succession. Part of that was the design process for part 2 also. Then I wanted to keep the same set. I wanted to keep the same design team because we already had a shorthand, and we could build off of this great design that Vicky has put together, and the scenic component, and David Mickelson did the costumes, and Donna Ruzicka did the lights, Joe Payne did the sound. All those guys were on board last year. So it's been really great to go, okay, here we are again. How can we tell this side of the story here together? And it's been great. They're a great team.
And just as an aside, since it's Saturday, we do have an actors seminar here today at 11 a.m. The actors today will be King Henry and Prince Hal, Larry Bull and Sam Ashdown. So I hope you can stay for that hour. Yes.
I was curious about the any history or research you've done about the real characters. Did some of them actually live? You mentioned that Prince Hal and Hotspur were really not the same age in reality. So I was curious about, was there a person that could have been a Falstaff? Were there people that could have been these characters?
Yeah, well, they are all sort of based on actual historical figures. Falstaff, however, is sort of an amalgamation of two people. I think Sir John Oldcastle, I think was his name, and but it's a complete Shakespeare invention where he took Falstaff. That is a complete Shakespeare invention based on a historical guy. And same with all the rest of the characters. You know, most of the tavern, I think that's Shakespeare's creation. Pistol and Bardolph and those guys. But most of the Northumberland, Mowbray, Hastings, even Poins, I mean, how all of them have historical resonance in history. It's just sort of how Shakespeare sort of woven them together, of taking these iconic events in Henry's reign. There's also a lot of scholarship on Part 2, and you know, did Shakespeare intend to write this as one play, and that he got into it and was like, well, we're just now at the Battle of Shrewsbury and there's so much more play here, I have to put this into 2 plays. There's great scholarship on that, and uncertainty that the story was just too epic that it had to be divided into 2 parts. There's also things in Part 2 where new characters begin to be woven in that then are also woven into The Merry Wives of Windsor, which is another play revolving around Falstaff. Much lighter, very different play. But characters like Pistol, Nym, Robin, the boy, Justice Shallow, all of those characters are in Merry Wives, but none of them are in Henry IV Part 1. And neither are the brothers, actually, in Part 1. You don't see Thomas or Thomas of Clarence and Gloucester in Part 1. They come into this play. So I think this was Shakespeare developing his hand as he started to put this together and go, oh, let's put them in here and put this in here, knowing that they might go here. And there's a lot of scholarship that says, well, Shakespeare wrote The Merry Wives of Windsor because Shakespeare killed him off, and it was like one of the Queen's favorite characters was Sir John Falstaff. So she said, write a play for me revolving around Sir John Falstaff. So he wrote The Merry Wives of Windsor, which of course is a lighthearted romp, and you know, shows Falstaff in all of his maneuvering and wooing of the ladies and everything. But that is a delightful comedy, essentially. That's the lure of them. I'm not sure exactly the historical fact on that.
So I just wanted to say thank you. I was riveted by the play.
Oh, good.
And the interaction between the father and the son. And there was the other father and the son, you know, Hotspur's father. And I was just curious about Northumberland. I felt like there was a lot of potential, you know, for a lot more. And I'm just curious if you had any thoughts on Northumberland's struggle.
Yeah, I mean, Northumberland, I think, is a really fascinating character because you see, I actually played him in Richard II here, and sort of seeing him ally himself with Bolingbroke. He was part of Richard's sort of triage of men, and then sort of stepped away from Richard and joined with Bolingbroke, and then later left himself from Bolingbroke. That there's a calculated diplomat there, strategist. And of course, in Part 1, he sort of takes a back seat because you see the power of his son, who is all power and all knight and all chivalry and less diplomat, less intelligent. I mean, I'm not saying he's not intelligent, but he uses brawn over brains. And Northumberland's choice to sort of throw his son to the fire, essentially, by not joining him in Part 1, is something that will plague him and starts plaguing him in this play. That Lady Percy says, you left him. You left your own son to die on the battlefield without bringing him more troops. And it was a terrible move on his part. And he's plagued with that. And I think that's why Shakespeare has him retreat away, you know, the sense of falling away. He's a guilt-ridden man, I think, Northumberland. And even in the first scene, which I think is a very crucial scene of him getting these reports about what happened to his son, It's mixed with both woe and then also complete terror. And that's what Mowbray says. And Mowbray is actually the son of Mowbray and Richard II that was banished with Richard, or with Henry Bolingbroke, and Bolingbroke went to fight him, and then Richard threw his warder down and banished them or whatever. But Mowbray has that personal angst against Bolingbroke. And here you have Mowbray trying to uplift Northumberland. And it's really the crucial turning point for the rebellion, because without Northumberland, they can't succeed. Without his numbers, his troops. And once again, he gets right to the front of the line and then backpedals on it. And I think it's because of his personal journey with Henry, with Bolingbroke, and that he was there when he became king. Northumberland was there. Northumberland helped him to the crown, and then turned his cheek. And that is the thing that roots in Henry's fear of not trusting anybody, any of the rebellious faction. And it's also Northumberland's fear about, if I make this move, he could make this move. And they're both fathers, and they have offspring. And then one of their offspring, that's the great thing in Henry IV, Part 1, is these two sons that are really two sides of the same coin. And Hal winning that fight, which the odds were against him. And rightfully so, because I'm not exactly sure that Hotspur, with all of his chivalry and all of his brawn, could maintain a diplomatic sense of being with this state, And I think Northumberland also sees that a little bit. And it's the sins of the father. This is what this play is about, all of these plays, and how that's instilled into their offspring.
We're getting to the end of the hour, and I know you have not announced the 2016 season. However, we do know Henry V will be
yes.
on the new stage next season with Sam playing Hal. Correct. And will Brian Vaughn be directing that production as well?
Not sure yet, actually. I think so. I would love to do it. I'm probably. I mean, I would really like to continue on with it, and especially just with working with Sam on this, final chapter for him. And I love the play, so probably.
Okay, I hope. I thought you had announced last season you were going to direct Henry V. That's why I brought it up. But
yes, it's just not out
Sorry.
there yet.
Yeah,
It's
okay, it's not out there yet. Well, they won't tell.
Together. Yeah.
No one will tell.
Don't
And
tell
the
them.
fact that we're live streaming doesn't mean anything. Yes,
That
final
doesn't
comment?
mean anything at all. It will, yes. And we're looking at, that's part of the reason for some of the delay in our season announcement is we have 2 new buildings going online, and a new studio space, 200-seat flexible black box studio, and then of course the new Shakespeare Theater, the Ingolstadt. So we're really examining the rollout of plays and what those offerings might be, and the rehearsal process. But yes, we will have pretty much the same start time, whether it's in preview or opening. There will be productions at the end of June. Yeah.
And I will say, if you have, I'm sure you do, a real nostalgic feeling for the outdoor Adams Theater, the final performance on that stage will be Henry IV Part 2, the 5th of September, I believe. And there are plans made that I won't announce, for something quite extraordinary on that final evening. So I hope you will all come back for that final performance, and then of course be here for opening of Henry V. Anything you want to say about that final week or that performance, or should they just come?
Stay tuned, I guess. Yeah, no, I mean, it will. Obviously, there's going to be some great celebration about that in the final week, and of giving the send off into the new space. And you should come check it out.
Okay, Brian Vaughn, thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, we'll take a quick break, get up off those soft benches, and David Ivers will be here next hour to talk to us about Charlie's Aunt.
Gosh, I have a 7-year-old daughter, and